1943, Atlantic Ocean. A German U-boat commander raises his periscope, searching for Allied convoys. His hydrophone operator suddenly reports massive propeller sounds. A battleship, perhaps even an entire fleet. The commander orders evasion, dive deep, silent running. They wait, terrified, as the battleship passes overhead. But there was no battleship, there was no fleet. Just whales, seals, and a brilliant acoustic deception that would help win the Battle of the Atlantic. This is the story of how scientists turned ocean sounds into weapons, how they made submarines hide from fish, and how acoustic warfare changed naval combat forever. Stay until the end to discover the unexpected consequence that haunts oceans today. In early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was reaching its most critical phase. German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant ships faster than they could be replaced. Every day, thousands of tons of supplies destined for Britain, food, fuel, weapons, ammunition, vanished beneath the waves. The statistics were terrifying. In March 1943 alone, U-boats sank 108 ships, totaling over 600,000 tons. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the German submarine force, believed he was weeks away from victory. If he could sustain this rate of destruction for just a few more months, Britain would starve and the war would be won. Allied sailors called the Atlantic crossing the death run. Merchant mariners had shorter life expectancy than infantry on the front lines. When a torpedo struck, men had perhaps 3 minutes to abandon ship before it went down. In frigid North Atlantic waters, survival time was measured in minutes, not hours. The fundamental problem was detection. The ocean was vast, dark, and three-dimensional. A submarine could hide anywhere in millions of cubic kilometers of water. Surface ships relied primarily on visual observation, useless at night, in fog, or when submarines attacked submerged. Radar helped, but early systems were crude and couldn't detect submarines underwater. Depth charges were effective, but only if you knew where the submarine was. And U-boats had learned to dive deep and wait silently until hunters gave up and left. By early 1943, German submarine technology was sophisticated. U-boats could dive to 250 meters, stay submerged for hours, and move silently at slow speeds. Their hydrophone systems could detect propeller sounds from kilometers away, giving them warning of approaching threats. This created tactical paradox. To hunt submarines, surface ships had to move, which created noise that warned submarines. But staying still meant convoys couldn't reach their destinations. The Allies were trapped in losing strategy. Enter sonar, or as the British called it, ASDIC. The technology worked by sending sound pulses through water and listening for echoes. When a pulse hit solid object like a submarine hull, it reflected back, revealing location. Sonar was revolutionary but had serious limitations. It worked poorly in rough seas. Temperature layers in the ocean created blind zones where sound wouldn't penetrate. And the ocean was full of things that reflected sound: rocks, wrecks, fish schools, even temperature boundaries. Sonar operators needed to distinguish submarine echoes from hundreds of false contacts. This required training, experience, and nerves of steel when lives depended on correct identification within seconds. But some scientists began thinking differently about the problem. If the ocean was full of sounds that confused Allied sonar, couldn't those same sounds confuse German hydrophones? The idea emerged from multiple sources simultaneously. In Britain, the Admiralty's Anti-Submarine Warfare Division was exploring acoustic deception. In the United States, the Columbia University Division of War Research was studying underwater acoustics. And in Canada, the National Research Council was analyzing biological sounds in the ocean. They all arrived at the same conclusion: the ocean's natural soundscape could be weaponized. Whales, dolphins, seals, fish, shrimp all produced sounds. Some were ultrasonic, beyond human hearing. Others were low-frequency rumbles that traveled kilometers through water. And crucially, some biological sounds resembled mechanical noise from ships. What if Allied forces could amplify, record, or simulate these sounds? What if they could make U-boats believe the ocean was full of threats when actually it was empty? What if they could turn the submarine's most important sense, hearing, into a liability? This was the genesis of biological acoustic deception, one of the strangest and most effective tactics of the Battle of the Atlantic. To understand how biological acoustic deception worked, we need to understand the underwater soundscape that submarines operated in. The ocean is not silent. Early submarine designers assumed it was, but that was fundamentally wrong. The ocean is actually incredibly noisy, filled with constant cacophony of sounds from sources both biological and geological. Biological sources. Whales produce some of the loudest sounds in nature. Blue whales generate low-frequency pulses at 180 to 190 decibels, louder than a jet engine. These sounds travel hundreds of kilometers through water. Sperm whales produce clicks at 230 decibels, among the loudest biological sounds ever measured. Dolphins and porpoises use echolocation, high-frequency clicks that sound remarkably like sonar pings. A pod of dolphins could completely confuse early sonar systems, appearing as multiple small contacts moving erratically. Seals and sea lions vocalize extensively, producing barks, whistles, and groans that travel well through water. During mating season, their vocalizations intensify dramatically. But the most surprising source was shrimp. Snapping shrimp found in tropical and temperate waters create loud popping sounds by rapidly closing their claws. The collective sound of millions of snapping shrimp creates a continuous crackling noise that can mask other sounds completely. Fish also contribute significantly. Many species produce sounds for communication, courtship, or territorial defense. Drumfish, croakers, and toadfish all generate distinctive sounds. During spawning season, the noise level increases dramatically. Geological and physical sources. Underwater earthquakes generate low-frequency rumbles that travel thousands of kilometers. Volcanic activity produces similar sounds. Icebergs breaking apart create thunderous cracks and grinding noises. Waves and weather create surface noise that penetrates deep into the ocean. Storm systems generate characteristic sound patterns. Rain hitting the ocean surface creates a distinctive acoustic signature. Even ocean currents moving past underwater topography generate sound. Water flowing through channels, over ridges, and around seamounts creates turbulence that hydrophones can detect. Acoustic properties of water. Sound travels approximately 4.5 times faster in water than in air, about 1,500 meters per second compared to 343 meters per second in air. This faster propagation creates both advantages and challenges for underwater detection. Temperature, salinity, and pressure all affect sound propagation. The ocean has layers of different temperatures and densities that bend sound waves, creating shadow zones where sound doesn't reach. This creates a phenomenon called the deep sound channel, a layer of water where sound travels extreme distances with minimal attenuation. Whales use this channel for long-distance communication. Submarines try to hide in it. German hydrophone technology. By 1943, German submarines were equipped with sophisticated hydrophone arrays. The Gruppenhorstgerät (SGH) system used multiple hydrophones arranged around the submarine to determine direction of sound sources. Experienced hydrophone operators could identify ship types by propeller sounds. They could distinguish between merchant ships, destroyers, and larger warships. They could estimate range based on sound intensity, and they could often hear approaching threats before visual or radar detection was possible. This made hydrophones the submarine's primary early warning system. U-boat commanders relied on them extensively, especially when operating submerged or in poor visibility. But hydrophone operators faced constant challenge, distinguishing genuine threats from biological noise. Training manuals included descriptions of common biological sounds to avoid false alarms. Operators learned to recognize whale songs, dolphin clicks, and fish sounds. This training created opportunity. If Allied scientists could produce sounds that resembled ship noise but were actually biological, they could trigger false alarms, force submarines to evade phantom threats, and waste their limited battery power on unnecessary maneuvering. The acoustic deception program began with simple question: which biological sounds most resembled ship machinery? In spring 1943, an unusual group assembled in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Marine biologists, acoustical engineers, naval officers, and submarine veterans came together for a classified project that would seem absurd if it weren't desperately necessary. Their mission? Record, analyze, and catalog every biological sound in the North Atlantic that could be weaponized. Leading the effort was Dr. Marie Poland Fish, a marine biologist from the University of Rhode Island who had spent years studying fish vocalization. She was joined by Dr. William Sheville from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, who specialized in marine mammal acoustics. The military side was represented by Lieutenant Commander Charles Bishop, a submarine officer who understood how hydrophone operators thought and what sounds would fool them. And the technical expertise came from Bell Laboratories, who had cutting-edge recording equipment and signal analysis capabilities. Their first challenge was recording sounds in the field. In 1943, underwater recording technology was primitive. Hydrophones were bulky, fragile, and prone to interference. Recording media was magnetic wire, which degraded quickly and was difficult to work with.
The catalog they compiled was extraordinary. Humpback whales. Their songs included components that, when recorded at certain distances, resembled rhythmic machinery. The low-frequency moans sounded remarkably like ship engines when filtered appropriately. Fin whales produced 20 Hz pulses in regular patterns that could be mistaken for distant propeller beats, especially in poor acoustic conditions. Pilot whales traveled in groups and produced complex whistles and clicks that, collectively, sounded like multiple vessels. Bearded seals created otherworldly trills and ascending whistles that could mimic certain mechanical sounds. During breeding season, males produced especially loud and distinctive vocalizations. Walruses produced bell-like sounds and knocking noises that resembled mechanical impacts or depth charge explosions. But the most useful discovery was completely unexpected. Ice. Icebergs, pack ice, and sea ice produce extraordinary range of sounds as they crack, shift, and grind. Under the right conditions, ice sounds could mimic almost anything: propeller noise, engine rumble, even torpedo launches. More importantly, ice sounds were unpredictable and constantly changing, making them difficult to classify definitively. A hydrophone operator hearing strange sounds near icebergs would be legitimately uncertain whether sounds were biological, geological, or mechanical. The team recorded hundreds of hours of ice sounds, the sharp cracks of thermal expansion, the grinding rumble of ice flows colliding, the eerie groans of pressure ridges forming, and the spectacular thunderclaps of icebergs calving. They also documented how these sounds propagated through water, how temperature layers affected them, and how they appeared on different types of hydrophone systems. After 6 months of recording, analysis, and testing, the team had a library of sounds that could plausibly deceive German hydrophone operators. But recording sounds was only first step. The real challenge was deploying them effectively. They needed to create acoustic illusions that would be believable to experienced hydrophone operators, cause submarines to alter course or dive unnecessarily, waste submarine battery power, create enough uncertainty to reduce U-boat effectiveness. The solution came from unexpected source, the entertainment industry. Bell Laboratories engineers who had developed sound systems for movie theaters adapted their technology for underwater acoustic projection. They created underwater loudspeakers capable of broadcasting pre-recorded sounds at depths and frequencies that would reach submarine hydrophones. These devices could be deployed from surface ships, submarines, or anchored at strategic locations. The acoustic warfare program was ready for field testing. The first operational test of biological acoustic deception occurred in May 1943 in waters south of Iceland where U-boat activity was intense. A convoy of 40 merchant ships, escorted by 6 destroyers and 2 corvettes, was crossing the North Atlantic on the standard route from Halifax to Liverpool. Intelligence indicated that at least 3 U-boats were operating in their path, forming a patrol line that the convoy would have to cross. 2 of the escort vessels had been equipped with experimental acoustic projection systems. They carried recordings of whale sounds, seal vocalizations, and ice noises ready to deploy if U-boats were detected. On the second night of the crossing, a destroyer's radar picked up periscope contact at 8,000 meters. The submarine quickly submerged before the destroyer could close range. Normally, this would trigger a depth charge attack, but the escort commander had a different plan. Instead of charging directly toward the contact, the destroyer slowly approached while the second equipped vessel maneuvered to a flank position. When they were in position, approximately 2,000 meters from the estimated submarine location, they activated the acoustic projection systems. The sound they broadcast was a recording of humpback whale vocalizations mixed with the distinctive propeller sounds of a cruiser at medium speed, all filtered and manipulated to seem like it was coming from a different direction than the actual convoy. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Hydrophone operators on the destroyer heard the U-boat's engines engage as it maneuvered away from the phantom sounds. The submarine dove deeper and changed course, moving away from both the acoustic projection and the actual convoy. The convoy passed through safely without attack. Post-war analysis of German records confirmed that U-515, commanded by Kapitän Lieutenant Werner Henke, reported encountering heavy escort, including what he believed was a cruiser, causing him to break off attack. But there was no cruiser. The only heavy escort sounds came from the acoustic projection system, broadcasting a mixture of whale sounds and recorded propeller noise. Encouraged by this success, Allied forces rapidly expanded acoustic deception operations. More ships were equipped, more sounds were recorded and refined, and tactics evolved. Tactic 1: the Phantom Fleet. Acoustic projection systems would broadcast sounds of multiple ships at distances of 5 to 10 kilometers from the actual convoy. Submarines detecting these sounds would assume a second convoy or additional escort forces were nearby, complicating their attack planning. Tactic 2: the false contact. When a submarine was detected but couldn't be immediately attacked, nearby ships would broadcast whale or seal sounds from a different direction. The submarine, hearing sounds from multiple bearings, would have difficulty determining which were genuine threats. Tactic 3: the acoustic minefield. In areas with high U-boat activity, acoustic projection devices could be anchored on the ocean floor, programmed to broadcast ship sounds at irregular intervals. Submarines transiting these areas would constantly hear phantom contacts, forcing them to maneuver cautiously and waste time and battery power. Tactic 4: the convergence illusion. Multiple projection systems would broadcast synchronized sounds, creating the illusion of converging threats. Submarines would believe they were being surrounded and take evasive action, moving away from their intended patrol areas. The German response was initially confused. U-boat commanders reported increasingly strange acoustic conditions in the North Atlantic. Hydrophone operators detected contacts that disappeared inexplicably. Sounds appeared from impossible directions or moved in physically impossible ways. Some commanders suspected acoustic deception, but distinguishing between genuine biological noise, natural phenomena, and deliberate deception was nearly impossible in real combat conditions. The uncertainty alone reduced U-boat effectiveness. By mid-1943, the tactical situation had shifted. U-boats were sinking fewer ships. convoys were crossing with lower casualty rates, and German submarine losses were increasing as they were forced into predictable evasion patterns. But acoustic deception was only one factor in a multifaceted campaign. While Allied forces deliberately used biological sounds to confuse submarines, nature itself was providing unexpected assistance. The North Atlantic's marine life responded to the massive naval activity in ways that further complicated German submarine operations. Whales, which had been heavily hunted before the war, began to recover during wartime as commercial whaling largely ceased. Their populations increased significantly, especially in the North Atlantic, where whaling had been most intensive. This population increase meant more whale sounds in waters where submarines operated. And whales, being highly intelligent and curious animals, often approached ships and submarines, investigating these strange new objects in their territory. U-boat commanders reported frustrating incidents where whales would approach their submarines, sometimes even making physical contact with the hull. The sounds of whale vocalizations would completely mask other acoustic information, forcing submarines to shut down hydrophones temporarily or risk missing genuine threats. In several documented incidents, whales seemed to deliberately follow submarines. Whether this was curiosity, territorial behavior, or a response to submarine acoustic emissions is unclear, but the practical effect was that submarines couldn't operate stealthily when accompanied by vocalizing whales. One particularly remarkable incident occurred in August 1943. U-664, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Adolf Graef, reported being harassed by several large whales that followed the submarine for over 6 hours. Every time the submarine changed course, the whales adjusted their path to continue following him. Graef eventually surfaced and fired the deck gun to scare them away, which succeeded but also revealed his position to Allied aircraft, leading to his submarine being sunk the next day.
Dolphins and porpoises also interacted with submarines in unexpected ways. Their echolocation clicks, which operated at frequencies similar to Allied sonar, would sometimes trigger submarine alarms designed to warn of active sonar detection. This created numerous false alarms that trained operators to be less reactive to such signals, which occasionally meant missing genuine sonar contacts. Seal populations, undisturbed by reduced fishing activity, expanded significantly in areas used by submarines for transit or hiding. Seals are naturally curious and would investigate submerged submarines, their vocalizations adding to acoustic confusion. Perhaps most bizarrely, there were reports of sperm whales attacking submarines. Sperm whales are apex predators that hunt giant squid at extreme depths. Their sonar is powerful enough to stun prey. Whether they mistook submarines for prey, were defending territory, or were simply curious is unknown, but several U-boats reported violent impacts from large animals that appeared deliberate. The cumulative effect was that the North Atlantic became an increasingly difficult acoustic environment for submarines. Every biological sound had to be evaluated as potentially dangerous. Every whale song might mask approaching destroyer. Every seal bark might indicate proximity to shore or shallow water. German submarine training began including extensive sections on biological sounds. Operators learned to distinguish between dozens of species and their various vocalizations. But this training was also exploited by Allied acoustic warfare specialists. They intentionally mixed biological sounds with mechanical sounds in ways that fell into the uncertain category. Sounds that could be biological or mechanical, requiring submarine commanders to make judgment calls under pressure with incomplete information. The psychological effect was significant. U-boat commanders became increasingly cautious, spending more time submerged, moving more slowly, and avoiding areas with high biological activity. This reduced their operational effectiveness even when no actual threat was present. One U-boat captain, interviewed after the war, described the experience. "We spent half our time hiding from whales and the other half wondering if the whales we heard were actually destroyers. The ocean became our enemy as much as the Allied forces." Nature had become, inadvertently but effectively, an ally in the Battle of the Atlantic. By late 1943, German naval intelligence had confirmed what many U-boat commanders suspected. The Allies were using acoustic deception techniques. The question was how to counter them. Admiral Karl Donitz, commander of the U-boat force, ordered immediate development of improved hydrophone systems capable of distinguishing biological from mechanical sounds. But this proved extraordinarily difficult. The fundamental problem was that sound in water behaves in complex and often counterintuitive ways. Temperature layers, salinity gradients, and pressure variations all affect how sound propagates. Biological sounds and mechanical sounds overlap significantly in frequency and amplitude. German engineers at the Kriegsmarine's technical research facilities created several approaches. Approach 1, spectral analysis. They created more sophisticated analysis equipment that could break down sounds into frequency components. The theory was that mechanical sounds would have regular, consistent frequency signatures, while biological sounds would be more variable and irregular. This worked to some extent, but Allied acoustic warfare specialists had anticipated this. They deliberately added irregularity to recorded mechanical sounds and selected biological sounds with particularly regular patterns. Approach 2, multiple hydrophone arrays. By using multiple hydrophones at different locations on the submarine, operators could triangulate sound sources and analyze how sound changed with perspective. Genuine ships would show consistent acoustic signatures from multiple angles, while some acoustic illusions might reveal inconsistencies. Again, this had limited effectiveness because genuine biological sounds also showed consistent multi-angle signatures, and Allied projection systems could be deployed in ways that created convincing spatial acoustic characteristics. Approach 3, pattern recognition training. German submarine schools intensified training in acoustic recognition. Operators spent hundreds of hours learning to distinguish between various sounds. They practiced with recordings, in pool facilities with underwater speakers, and during patrol training missions. The training improved operator performance, but it also had unintended consequence. Operators became so focused on careful analysis that their reaction time increased. In combat, seconds matter. Taking extra time to analyze sounds before responding could mean the difference between escape and destruction. Approach 4, acoustic signature database. The Kriegsmarine compiled comprehensive database of biological sounds from different ocean regions. Submarines were instructed to record sounds in their operational areas for analysis. The goal was to build understanding of normal biological acoustic environment in each region, making anomalies easier to detect. This approach showed promise, but implementation was slow. Recording equipment was heavy and took up valuable space. Analysis was time-consuming, and the ocean's biological acoustic scape was constantly changing with seasons, weather, and animal migrations. Approach 5, doctrine changes. Unable to completely solve the acoustic deception problem technically, the Kriegsmarine changed operational doctrine. Submarines were instructed to rely less on hydrophones and more on visual observation, radar, and radio intelligence. This made submarines somewhat less vulnerable to acoustic deception, but also forced them to operate more on the surface or at periscope depth, making them more vulnerable to radar detection and air attack. German submarines also began operating in different patrol areas where biological noise was lower, deeper water, colder regions, away from continental shelves. But this also moved them away from convoy routes, reducing their effectiveness. The adaptation process was ongoing throughout late 1943 and into 1944. Some U-boat commanders became highly skilled at operating in acoustically complex environments. Others never adjusted and continued suffering from acoustic confusion. But by this time, the Allies had gained other advantages. Improved radar, long-range aircraft, code breaking, and numerical superiority all contributed to turning the tide in the Battle of the Atlantic.
Acoustic deception was never the sole determining factor, but it contributed to overall pressure that made U-boat operations increasingly difficult, dangerous, and ultimately unsustainable. The Germans adapted but never completely solved the problem. As acoustic warfare in the Atlantic intensified, scientists and naval officers began noticing unexpected consequences that extended far beyond immediate tactical advantages.
Impact on marine life. The most immediate concern was effect on the marine animals whose sounds were being used. Acoustic projection systems broadcasting at high power could potentially harm marine mammals, particularly whales and dolphins whose hearing is highly sensitive. Dr. Marie Poland Fish and her team advocated for guidelines limiting projection power and avoiding frequencies known to cause distress to marine mammals. The military was responsive to these concerns, partly because harming marine populations might actually reduce effectiveness of acoustic deception by eliminating the genuine biological sounds that made deception plausible. However, the broader naval activity, thousands of ships crossing the Atlantic, active sonar systems, depth charge explosions, was already impacting marine life on unprecedented scale. The acoustic projection systems were probably minimal additional stress compared to general wartime naval operations. Scientific discovery. The acoustic warfare program generated a massive amount of data about marine biology and acoustics. Scientists recorded and analyzed sounds that had never been systematically studied before. They discovered species that communicated in ways previously unknown. They mapped acoustic environments across the Atlantic. This data would later contribute to an entire new field of marine bioacoustics. After the war, many of the researchers who had worked on acoustic deception became pioneers in studying how marine animals use sound for communication, navigation, and hunting. The techniques developed for analyzing submarine sounds, spectral analysis, pattern recognition, and signal processing would later be applied to understanding whale songs, dolphin echolocation, and fish communication. Long-term military impact. Acoustic deception during World War II established principles that would shape submarine warfare for decades. The Cold War submarine operations between the United States and Soviet Union involved extensive acoustic warfare, with both sides using increasingly sophisticated deception techniques. Modern submarines still deal with the fundamental challenge, distinguishing genuine threats from biological noise and deliberate deception. The difference is that modern systems use computer analysis, advanced signal processing, and machine learning, but the basic problem remains the same.
Environmental monitoring. One unexpected benefit was that the hydrophone networks established for submarine detection also proved useful for monitoring other phenomena. They detected underwater earthquakes, tracked ice movements, and even recorded volcanic eruptions. After the war, some of these acoustic monitoring systems were repurposed for scientific research. The SOS-US, Sound Surveillance System Network, originally designed to track Soviet submarines, has been used to study whale migration, monitor underwater seismic activity, and track climate change impacts on ocean acoustics. Psychological impact on submariners. Perhaps the most profound unexpected consequence was the psychological effect on submarine crews. Operating in an environment where you couldn't trust your senses created constant stress and uncertainty. Post-war interviews with U-boat survivors revealed that acoustic confusion was a major source of anxiety, not knowing whether sounds represented genuine threat or deception, whether to evade or continue mission, whether to trust instruments or intuition. These uncertainties wore down crew morale and effectiveness. Some submarine veterans reported long-term psychological effects, including heightened startle responses to sudden sounds and difficulty distinguishing significant sounds from background noise, symptoms consistent with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Cultural legacy. The acoustic warfare program captured public imagination after the war when details were declassified. The idea of whales and seals inadvertently becoming weapons, of sound itself being weaponized, appealed to both scientific curiosity and sense of the surreal.
Books, documentaries, and eventually films explored these themes. The concept that nature could be both weapon and ally in human conflict resonated during the Cold War when technological warfare seemed increasingly abstract and incomprehensible. The legacy continues today in debates about military use of ocean environments, the ethics of acoustic technologies that affect marine life, and the relationship between human technology and natural systems. To fully appreciate how biological acoustic deception worked, we need to understand the physics and biology underlying underwater sound. Sound propagation in water. Water is approximately 800 times denser than air, which dramatically affects how sound travels. In water, sound waves travel faster, about 1,500 meters per second versus 343 meters per second in air, and can travel much longer distances before dissipating. However, propagation is not uniform. The ocean has acoustic layers created by temperature, salinity, and pressure gradients. These layers can bend sound waves, create shadow zones where sound doesn't penetrate, and establish channels where sound travels extreme distances with minimal loss. The deep sound channel, typically at depths of 1,000 to 1,200 meters, acts like an acoustic waveguide. Sounds generated in this channel can travel across entire ocean basins. Whales use this channel for long-distance communication. Submarines tried to use it for concealment. Frequency matters. Different frequencies behave differently in water. Low-frequency sounds below 100 Hz travel farther but provide less detailed information. High-frequency sounds above 10 kHz provide more detail but attenuate quickly. This creates trade-off in hydrophone design. Low-frequency systems can detect distant contacts but provide limited information. High-frequency systems provide detail but only work at shorter ranges. Biological sounds span enormous frequency range. Blue whale vocalizations, 10 to 40 Hz, extremely low. Humpback whale songs, 20 to 4,000 Hz, wide range. Dolphin echolocation, 40 to 150,000 Hz, ultrasonic. Snapping shrimp, 2,000 to 5,000 Hz, mid-range. This diversity meant that biological sounds could interfere with hydrophone systems across their entire operational spectrum. Why biological sounds confused hydrophones? Several factors made biological sounds particularly confusing. Amplitude variability. Whale vocalizations can be extraordinarily loud, up to 190 decibels at source, comparable to large ship machinery. This means they could trigger detection systems designed to identify ships at long range. Frequency overlap. Many biological sounds occupy the same frequency ranges as ship machinery. Whale moans and engine rumbles both produce low-frequency sounds around 20 to 50 Hz. Spatial complexity. Groups of vocalizing animals create complex acoustic fields with sounds coming from multiple directions simultaneously. This resembles acoustic signature of a convoy with multiple ships. Temporal patterns. Some biological sounds have regular, rhythmic patterns that mimic mechanical processes. Fin whale pulses at regular 20-second intervals could be mistaken for slow-turning propellers. Unpredictability. Unlike ship sounds, which are relatively consistent and predictable, biological sounds change unpredictably. Animals move, alter their vocalizations, start and stop calling. This unpredictability made analysis difficult. The art of acoustic mimicry. Allied acoustic warfare specialists became experts at selecting, manipulating, and combining sounds to create convincing deceptions. They discovered that perfect mimicry wasn't necessary. Plausible ambiguity was sufficient. The goal was not to make whales sound exactly like a ship, but to make whales sound similar enough that hydrophone operator couldn't be certain it wasn't a ship. In combat conditions with adrenaline high and the consequences of missing a genuine threat potentially fatal, operators would err on the side of caution. They used several techniques. Filtering. Removing frequency components that were distinctly biological while enhancing components that resembled machinery. Mixing. Combining multiple biological sounds to create acoustic texture resembling multiple ship sources. Spatial manipulation. Broadcasting from multiple locations to create the impression of distributed sound sources like a convoy. Temporal modification. Adjusting rhythm and pattern of sounds to be more regular and mechanical. Contextual placement. using sounds in contexts where operators would expect to encounter ships, enhancing believability. The science was sophisticated, but the application was pragmatic, create enough doubt to affect submarine behavior. By May 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic reached a critical turning point. After years of steadily increasing losses, Allied convoys suddenly began surviving at dramatically higher rates. U-boat casualties increased sharply while their effectiveness plummeted. Multiple factors contributed to this shift. Improved technology, centimetric radar that could detect submarine periscopes and snorkels, long-range aircraft with improved depth charges, more escort carriers providing air cover, better coordination between surface ships and aircraft, intelligence advantages, breaking of German naval codes, allowing convoy routing around U-boat patrol lines, direction finding of submarine radio transmissions, improved analysis of U-boat tactics and operational patterns, numerical superiority, American industrial production creating more escort ships, more merchant ships being built than sunk, growing number of trained escort crews, and acoustic warfare. While acoustic deception was not the primary factor in Allied victory, it contributed significantly to overall pressure on U-boat operations. Post-war analysis estimated that acoustic deception reduced U-boat effectiveness by approximately 15 to 20% in areas where it was actively employed. This might seem modest, but in the context of the Battle of the Atlantic, where margins were often thin, a 15 to 20% reduction in effectiveness was significant. It meant fewer ships sunk, fewer sailors lost, more supplies reaching Britain. More importantly, acoustic deception contributed to the cumulative psychological pressure on U-boat crews. Every false alarm, every phantom contact, every hour spent evading non-existent threats added to stress and uncertainty. German submariners who had entered the war with confidence and high morale increasingly described their patrols as exercises in survival, rather than hunting. The hunter had become the hunted, and the ocean itself seemed hostile. In May 1943, Admiral Dönitz temporarily withdrew U-boats from the North Atlantic, conceding that losses had become unsustainable. While he cited improved Allied air cover as the primary reason, acoustic confusion was mentioned in after-action reports as contributing factor. The withdrawal marked the unofficial end of Germany's attempt to win the war through submarine warfare. Though U-boats continued operations until war's end, they never again posed existential threat to Allied supply lines. Lessons learned. The acoustic warfare program demonstrated several principles that would influence military thinking for decades. Environmental warfare. The natural environment could be weaponized. Sound, temperature, weather, all could be exploited for military advantage. Sensory deception. Attacking enemy sensors was often more effective than attacking enemy platforms. Making them blind or deaf could be as effective as destroying them. Uncertainty as a weapon. Creating doubt and uncertainty in enemy decision-making had measurable operational value. Interdisciplinary collaboration. Marine biologists, acoustic engineers, and military operators working together produced innovations none could have achieved separately. Natural camouflage. Understanding the natural environment well enough to hide within it or mimic it was crucial for both offense and defense.
These lessons would shape Cold War submarine warfare, where acoustic stealth and deception became central to operations. Modern submarines are engineered to minimize their acoustic signature and to deceive enemy sonar systems. The Battle of the Atlantic also demonstrated limits of technology without understanding of natural environment. German U-boats had sophisticated technology, but Allied forces understood the ocean environment better and exploited that knowledge strategically. By late 1943, the acoustic warfare program was considered sufficiently successful that it continued and even expanded. New sounds were recorded, new deployment methods were developed, and the techniques pioneered in the Atlantic were adapted for Pacific theater operations. The whales, seals, and fish of the North Atlantic had, inadvertently but effectively, contributed to Allied victory in the longest continuous military campaign of World War II. The acoustic warfare program of World War II ended with the war's conclusion in 1945, but its legacy continues to resonate, literally and figuratively, today. Military applications. Modern submarine warfare remains fundamentally acoustic. Despite advances in every other technology, submarines still rely primarily on sound to detect threats and navigate underwater, and acoustic deception remains central to submarine tactics. Contemporary submarines use sophisticated acoustic signature management systems that make them extraordinarily quiet. They employ acoustic countermeasures, devices that emit sounds to confuse or deceive enemy sonar. Some systems deliberately mimic biological sounds, a direct descendant of the World War II program. The United States Navy's current submarine doctrine includes extensive training in acoustic environments, including how to distinguish between biological noise, geological sounds, and genuine threats. This training owes its existence to lessons learned during the Battle of the Atlantic. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet submarines engaged in continuous acoustic warfare. Soviet submarines would hide in areas of high biological activity, using whale sounds and ice noise as natural camouflage. American submarines developed increasingly sophisticated systems to penetrate this natural concealment. The SOUSS, or Sound Surveillance System Network, deployed across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, was designed to track Soviet submarines by listening for their acoustic signatures. But this system also became the world's largest marine biology research tool, recording whale migrations, tracking previously unknown species, and documenting changes in ocean soundscapes. Scientific revolution. The wartime acoustic research spawned the modern field of marine bioacoustics. Scientists who had worked on acoustic warfare became pioneers in studying how marine animals use sound. Dr. Roger Payne, who would later become famous for his recordings of humpback whale songs, was directly influenced by the declassified World War II research. His work helped launch the global whale conservation movement by making people aware of whales' complex acoustic communication. Today, we understand that the ocean's acoustic environment is crucial to marine life. Whales use sound for communication across thousands of kilometers. Dolphins use echolocation to hunt and navigate. Fish use sounds for mating, territorial defense, and schooling behavior. Even invertebrates like snapping shrimp play ecological roles through their acoustic contributions. This understanding leads to modern conservation challenges. The noise problem. One unintended consequence of acoustic warfare research was the realization that human-generated underwater noise from ships, sonar, seismic exploration, and military activities profoundly affects marine life. Modern commercial shipping creates a continuous background rumble across the world's oceans. This noise has increased dramatically since World War II, as shipping traffic has expanded exponentially. Studies showed that this constant noise interferes with whale communication, forcing whales to vocalize louder or change their behavior patterns. Military sonar systems, particularly active sonar used for submarine detection, can cause severe harm to marine mammals. There are documented cases of mass whale strandings correlated with naval exercises. The powerful acoustic pulses can damage marine mammals' hearing, disrupt their navigation, and cause them to surface too rapidly, resulting in decompression injuries. The irony is profound. The same whales whose sounds helped hide submarines and confuse enemy hydrophones are now threatened by the descendants of those very technologies. International regulations now attempt to balance military needs with marine conservation. Naval exercises must often be conducted away from known whale migration routes. Active sonar use is restricted in certain areas and seasons. Ships are encouraged to slow down in whale habitats to reduce noise, but enforcement is challenging, and the fundamental conflict remains. Humans want to use the ocean, and that use generates noise that affects creatures who evolved in a much quieter acoustic environment. Modern acoustic ecology. The field of acoustic ecology studies soundscapes as environmental indicators. By listening to underwater environments, scientists can assess ecosystem health, track biodiversity, and monitor climate change impacts. Ocean acidification, caused by increased atmospheric CO2 dissolving in seawater, affects how sound propagates underwater. Warming waters change acoustic properties. These changes affect both marine life and human activities like submarine operations.
Researchers now use underwater recording networks to monitor everything from fish populations to ship traffic to earthquake activity. Some of these networks use equipment directly descended from World War II hydrophone technology. The ethics of acoustic warfare. Modern discussions of military use of the ocean environment often reference the World War II acoustic warfare program. Was it ethical to weaponize marine animal sounds, to deliberately create acoustic conditions that might harm marine life? During the war, such questions were secondary to survival, but in retrospect, they raise important issues about how humans interact with natural systems. Contemporary military planners face similar dilemmas. Submarine warfare remains acoustically focused, but awareness of environmental impacts is much greater. Modern navies attempt to minimize ecological harm while maintaining operational effectiveness. This leads to interesting collaborations. Marine biologists work with naval officers to develop tactics that achieve military objectives while reducing environmental impact. Engineers design sonar systems that are effective but less harmful to marine mammals. Environmental regulations shape military training and operations. Cultural impact. The story of whales and submarines, of biological sounds becoming weapons, captured public imagination. It appears in documentaries, books, and films. The narrative that nature itself became involved in human conflict resonates symbolically. The Hunt for Red October, Tom Clancy's famous novel, features Soviet submarine hiding in undersea canyon while whales pass overhead, their sounds masking the submarine. This scene, and others like it in popular culture, trace back to World War II acoustic warfare. Museum exhibits about the Battle of the Atlantic often include sections on acoustic warfare and biological deception. Visitors find the concept fascinating that something as seemingly peaceful as whale songs could play a role in military operations. Looking forward, the ocean's acoustic environment faces unprecedented changes. Climate change is altering ocean temperatures and chemistry, affecting sound propagation. Human activities generate increasing noise. Marine populations are shifting in response to various pressures. Future submarine warfare will operate in acoustic environments quite different from those of World War II or even the Cold War. The biological soundscape is changing as species adapt to human presence, migrate due to temperature changes, and respond to altered ocean chemistry. Ironically, some naval analysts worry that decreased whale populations, due to various environmental pressures, might actually reduce natural acoustic camouflage that submarines have relied upon. The acoustic clutter that once frustrated submarine detection is now recognized as valuable natural concealment. The ultimate legacy. Perhaps the most important legacy of World War II acoustic warfare is the recognition that human activities and natural systems are inextricably linked. We cannot use the ocean without affecting the creatures that live there. We cannot wage war in the ocean without impacting ecosystems that evolved over millions of years. The scientists who recorded whale sounds to confuse U-boats helped launch our understanding of marine bioacoustics. The engineers who designed underwater acoustic projection systems pioneered technologies now used for marine research. The submariners who learned to distinguish biological from mechanical sounds contributed to our knowledge of the underwater soundscape. Today, as we grapple with how to use the ocean resources sustainably while protecting marine ecosystems, we can trace some of our understanding back to that desperate effort in 1943 to gain tactical advantage in the Battle of the Atlantic. The whales that inadvertently helped win that battle now need our help. The ocean that carried sounds of war now carries our responsibility to protect the creatures whose sounds once seemed like such a useful weapon. In the end, the acoustic warfare program teaches us a profound lesson. We are not separate from nature, even in the most technological forms of human conflict. Our technologies interact with natural systems in complex ways. Our actions have consequences that ripple through ecosystems in ways we cannot always predict. The U-boat commanders who dove deep to escape phantom battleships that were actually whales understood, in that moment, that the ocean was not just a battlefield, but a living environment with its own sounds, rhythms, and inhabitants. We would do well to remember that lesson today. The ocean is not silent. It never was, and the sounds that fill it, whether biological, geological, or human-made, tell stories about how we interact with the natural world, for better or worse. The whales are still singing. We should listen.
Spring 1943. American pilots arrive at their English airfield expecting sleek Spitfires. Instead, they find a 7-ton monster sitting on the tarmac. One pilot calls it a milk bottle with wings. Another says it looks like a flying bathtub. They nickname it the Jug, and not as a compliment. The P-47 Thunderbolt is the ugliest fighter anyone has ever seen, twice as heavy as any other fighter, and pilots absolutely hate it. But 3 years later, this ridiculous-looking airplane will have destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft, produced more aces than any other American fighter, and earned a reputation as the most indestructible warbird ever built. One fighter group will refuse to trade their ugly Jugs for the beautiful P-51 Mustang, proving that sometimes the ugliest machine makes the most deadly weapon. This is the story of the aircraft that went from laughingstock to legend. Stay until the end to discover why modern ground attack jets still carry the Thunderbolt name.
June 1940. Alexander Kartveli sat on a train from Wright Field, Ohio, back to New York, sketching furiously on the back of an envelope. The Georgian immigrant and chief engineer of Republic Aviation had just attended a meeting that destroyed 6 months of his work. His lightweight fighter design, the XP-47, was obsolete before it flew. The war in Europe had proven one brutal fact: lightweight fighters got shot down. American military observers watching the Battle of France reported back with alarming details. German fighters had heavy armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, and substantial firepower. British Spitfires and Hurricanes survived because they matched this protection. Lightweight fighters with minimal armor and weak armament didn't last long against Messerschmitt Bf-109s, bristling with cannon and machine guns. At the Wright Field meeting, Army Air Corps requirements had changed dramatically. The new fighter must have a ceiling of 40,000 feet, maximum speed exceeding 400 miles per hour at optimum altitude, and no fewer than 6 heavy machine guns mounted in the wings. Better yet, mount 8 guns. The fighter needed armor protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and range to escort bombers deep into enemy territory. Kartveli listened to these specifications and did mental calculations. His lightweight XP-47 design could never meet these requirements. The anemic Allison V-1710 engine simply lacked power. Adding armor, guns, ammunition, and fuel would turn the lightweight fighter into an overweight failure. He needed to start over completely, but there was no time. War was coming, and America needed fighters immediately. On that train ride, Kartveli made decisions that would define his career. If lightweights were obsolete, he would build something massive. Instead of the Allison engine producing 1,150 horsepower, he would use the new Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial, producing 2,000 horsepower. That engine required a turbocharger for high-altitude performance, which meant complex ducting running from nose to tail through the fuselage belly. Based on an estimated combat weight of 12,000 pounds, more than twice his original design, Kartveli sketched a semi-elliptical wing with 300 square feet of area. The proportions looked right. 8 50 caliber machine guns would require significant wing space for ammunition. 4 guns in each wing, staggered to allow side-by-side ammunition boxes holding 350 rounds each. Total ammunition load, 2,800 rounds, giving about 30 seconds of continuous fire. When Kartveli's assistant, Mish Roth, later recalled that train ride, he said Kartveli had drawn the airplane almost exactly as it would eventually be built, all from calculations done mentally and sketched on an envelope. By the time they reached New York, Kartveli had the basic design complete. Now he just had to convince the Army to buy a fighter that would dwarf everything else in the sky. Kartveli presented his design proposal for the XP-47B to the U.S. Army Air Corps on June 12, 1940. Military officials were skeptical. The proposed fighter would be enormous, the heaviest single-engine fighter ever conceived. Empty weight alone would exceed 9,900 pounds. Fully loaded for combat, the airplane would weigh over 12,000 pounds, potentially reaching 13,600 pounds with maximum fuel and ammunition. But the Army had few alternatives. European combat had proven that American fighter designs were obsolete. The P-40 Warhawk, P-39 Airacobra, and P-38 Lightning were already in development, but none fully met the new requirements. Kartvel's proposal promised performance that seemed almost too good: 412 miles per hour at 25,800 feet altitude, and ability to reach 15,000 feet in just 5 minutes, despite its weight. On September 6, 1940, the Army ordered one prototype. 1 week later, on September 13th, they ordered 161 P-47Bs and 602 P-47Cs for production before the prototype even flew. The contract totaled $56,499,924. It was an enormous gamble. If Kartvel's design failed, the money would be wasted and America would lack fighters when war came. Republic Aviation began construction immediately. The airplane was unlike anything built before. The R-2800 engine sat in a broad elliptical cowling that opened at the front like a horse collar, admitting cooling air for the engine, oil coolers, and turbo-supercharger intercooler system. Exhaust gases were routed through wastegate-equipped pipes, running along each side of the cockpit to drive the turbo-supercharger turbine mounted in the fuselage belly, roughly halfway between cockpit and tail. The propeller presented unique challenges. The R-2800's tremendous power required a 4-bladed Curtiss Electric constant-speed propeller measuring 12 feet in diameter. Providing ground clearance for this massive propeller while keeping guns low enough in the wings for ammunition storage seemed impossible. Kartvel's solved it with telescopic landing gear that compressed 9 inches during retraction, shortening enough when retracted to fit inside the wing, but extending fully for landing to provide adequate propeller clearance. The cockpit was surprisingly spacious and comfortable. Test pilots would later describe the seat as being like a lounge chair. The air-conditioned cockpit featured excellent visibility, though early versions used a hinged cockpit that proved problematic at high altitudes. Self-sealing fuel tanks sat under the cockpit, holding 305 gallons total. Armor plate protected the pilot from behind and below. On May 6, 1941, just 8 months after the prototype was ordered, test pilot Lowry Lawson Brabham took off from Republic's Factory Airfield at Farmingdale, New York, and flew the XP-47B to Mitchell Field. The first flight revealed minor problems like cockpit smoke from an oil drip, but overall performance impressed everyone. During testing, the XP-47B demonstrated its promised speed of 412 miles per hour at 25,800 feet altitude, an ability to reach 15,000 feet in just 5 minutes despite its weight. Kartvel had been right. His dinosaur had good proportions. But would pilots accept flying a fighter that weighed as much as a medium bomber? January 1943. The 56th Fighter Group arrived in England aboard the Queen Elizabeth, converted from luxury liner to troop transport, carrying 12,000 men. The pilots had trained on P-47s in Connecticut, but had hoped they might receive Spitfires once reaching England. Instead, they found more Thunderbolts waiting at their base near Horsham St. Faith. The pilots' first impressions were not favorable. Lieutenant James Goodson of the 4th Fighter Group, who had previously flown Spitfires with the RAF, stared at the massive P-47 in disbelief. After flying the delicate, fingertip-responsive Spitfire, he now faced 7 tons of airplane that looked like it belonged hauling Congo, not fighting enemy fighters. Goodson later wrote that pilots called it a 7-ton milk bottle. Captain Don Blaxley, an experienced RAF Eagle Squadron veteran with multiple aerial victories in Spitfires, was even more direct. After his first P-47 flight, he complained loudly that it was daunting to haul 7 tons of plane around the sky after the fingertip touch needed for the Spitfire. The P-47 seemed heavy, sluggish, unresponsive. Everything took more effort. More force on the stick, more time to accelerate, more runway to take off and land. The nicknames that emerged weren't compliments.
Jug was most common, referring to the airplane's resemblance to a common milk jug of the era. Some pilots claimed it stood for juggernaut, but that was charitable revisionism. Others called it the 7-ton milk bottle, big, ugly, repulsive scatterbolt, bucket of bolts, and cast iron beast. One pilot compared its profile to a flying bathtub. Radio problems plagued early operations. Colonel Hubert Zemke, commanding officer of the 56th Fighter Group, experienced multiple radio failures that forced him to abort missions. On May 4, 1943, during the group's first escort mission over Antwerp, Zemke lost radio communication over the Dutch coast and had to turn back, leaving command to Colonel Lorene McCullum. Zemke was furious, worried his pilots would think he abandoned them. That first escort mission ended in tragedy. In the heat of combat, McCullum shot down the first aircraft he saw, which turned out to be a British Spitfire, not a German fighter. The accident devastated McCullum and put Zemke under scrutiny from superiors. The P-47's teething problems were not just mechanical. Performance issues became apparent quickly. The P-47's rate of climb was disappointing compared to lighter fighters. Acceleration was slow. In turning fights, lighter enemy fighters could outturn the heavy Thunderbolt. Many pilots wondered if the Army had made a terrible mistake ordering thousands of these overweight machines. But there was one flight regime where the P-47 excelled beyond all expectations: the dive. In level flight, a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or Focke-Wulf FW-19 could match or exceed the P-47's speed. But when Thunderbolts rolled over and dove, nothing could follow. The P-47 could dive faster than any other fighter, reaching speeds that would tear apart lighter aircraft. And it could pull out of those dives safely, its robust construction handling loads that would break other planes.
Hub Zemke refused to let his pilots wallow in complaints. He had spent time as a combat observer with the Royal Air Force in 1940, watching the Battle of Britain and studying Luftwaffe tactics. He understood that success in combat depended less on aircraft performance and more on tactics that exploited strengths while minimizing weaknesses. Zemke developed what became known as dive, fire, and recover tactics. The P-47 struggled in turning dogfights, but excelled diving from altitude. Therefore, Zemke drilled his squadrons to patrol at high altitude above bomber formations. When German fighters appeared, P-47s would dive on them from above, fire deadly bursts from 8 50 caliber machine guns, and zoom back to altitude using momentum from the dive. The tactics required discipline. Pilots had to resist the temptation to follow enemy fighters down into turning battles where the P-47's weight became a disadvantage. The key was altitude advantage, diving attack, and immediate recovery to altitude. German pilots quickly learned to fear the Thunderbolt's diving attacks. The concentrated firepower of 8 50 caliber guns hitting at high closing speed was devastating. On June 13, 1943, Zemke scored his first 2 aerial victories, shooting down 2 Focke-Wulf FW-190s over Kassel while flying a P-47 marked Moy Tovarish. 2 days later, Captain Gerald W. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron became the first ace in the 56th Fighter Group and the second in the European Theater of Operations, all flying the maligned Thunderbolt. August 17, 1943, brought the P-47's baptism by fire during the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid. The 56th Fighter Group provided penetration support for B-17s of the 4th Bomb Wing headed to Regensburg in the morning, returned to base to rearm and refuel, then flew withdrawal support for the 1st Bomb Wing returning from Schweinfurt in the afternoon. In a running 20-minute battle across Belgium, the 56th claimed 17 German fighters destroyed for the loss of 3 P-47s and pilots. Pilots began appreciating the P-47's survivability. Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski reported that one of his squadron members took 5 direct 20mm cannon hits in his right wing, but still managed to return to base. Major Don Blakesley's Thunderbolt was hit by 68 cannon shells during one sortie, yet he flew back to England escorted by Major Goodson. Stories spread of P-47s returning with massive damage that would have destroyed other fighters. The rugged air-cooled R-2800 engine proved incredibly resilient. Liquid-cooled engines like those in P-51 Mustangs or P-38 Lightnings could be disabled by a single hit, puncturing coolant lines. The R-2800 could lose entire cylinders and keep running. Its 18 cylinders provided redundancy that saved countless pilots. Pilots discovered that the P-47's spacious, armored cockpit and robust structure provided exceptional protection. During crash landings, the extensive ductwork filling the fuselage belly acted as a cushion between pilot and ground. Multiple pilots survived crashes that would have been fatal in lighter aircraft. One pilot remarked, "When flying the Jug, I always felt as if I was in my mother's arms." Gradually, grudging acceptance turned to genuine affection. Lieutenant Will Bergsteiner of the 395th Fighter Group wrote in his diary, "We never realized we loved the old barrel and her 8 guns so much." The nickname Jug lost its derisive edge and became a term of endearment. The ugly fighter was proving its worth in the crucible of combat. By autumn 1943, the 56th Fighter Group had transformed from skeptical P-47 pilots into believers. Under Hub Zemke's leadership, they developed into the most effective fighter group in the 8th Air Force. Their aggressive tactics and growing expertise earned them the nickname Zemke's Wolfpack. The wolves were hunting, and their prey was the Luftwaffe. Zemke continuously refined tactics. He developed the Zemke fan, a formation where fighters rendezvoused at a prominent landmark ahead of bomber formations, then scattered in a 180-degree arc, each flight covering a sector. This flexible formation allowed fighters to intercept German attackers before they reached the bombers, while maintaining mutual support. The 8th Air Force eventually adopted modified versions of the Zemke fan for all fighter groups. The success of the 56th attracted attention. By early 1944, a friendly rivalry developed between Zemke's P-47-equipped 56th Fighter Group and Colonel Don Blakesley's P-51 Mustang-equipped 4th Fighter Group. Both competed for the highest score of enemy aircraft destroyed. Newspapers back home followed the competition, making celebrities of top aces like Zemke, Gabreski, and Robert S. Johnson. Big Week in February 1944 demonstrated the P-47's maturity. During Operation Argument, a week-long series of massive bombing raids against German aircraft production facilities, P-47s flew continuous escort missions. On March 6, 1944, during a Berlin escort mission, the 56th claimed 18 Bf-190s destroyed for the loss of 3 P-47s, and Zemke was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his leadership during that mission. March 16, 1944, saw the 56th Fighter Group record its 350th aerial victory. In just 1 year of combat, Zemke's Wolfpack had shot down 350 German aircraft while establishing themselves as the premier fighter unit in Europe. They had accomplished this flying the ugly fighter that everyone initially hated. Individual pilots became legendary. Captain Robert S. Johnson scored 27 aerial victories flying P-47s with the 56th Fighter Group. His book, Thunderbolt, written with aviation author Martin Caidin in 1958, became a bestseller that introduced thousands of readers to the P-47's combat record. Johnson's most famous mission occurred on June 26, 1943, when his badly damaged P-47 limped home after surviving sustained attacks by German fighters. The airplane's toughness saved his life. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski, also of the 56th, scored 28 aerial victories in P-47s, tying Pacific Theater ace Major Bong for most victories in the USAF at that time. Gabreski had previously flown Spitfires with the RAF, but came to prefer the Thunderbolt. He praised its roomy cockpit, nice handling characteristics, and truly spectacular dive performance. The emergence of the P-51 Mustang as the 8th Air Force's primary long-range escort fighter in mid-1944 might have relegated the P-47 to secondary status. The Mustang was faster, more agile, had longer range, and looked elegant compared to the chunky Thunderbolt. Most fighter groups eagerly transitioned to Mustangs, but Zemke's 56th Fighter Group refused. They wanted to keep their Jugs.
Summer 1944 brought a decision point for the 56th Fighter Group. The Army Air Forces offered to re-equip them with P-51 Mustangs, the new darling of fighter pilots. The Mustang had superior range, climbed faster, turned tighter, and was undeniably more beautiful. Every other P-47 group in the 8th Air Force jumped at the chance to trade their Thunderbolts for Mustangs, but the 56th said no. This decision shocked many observers. The Mustang was objectively superior in most performance metrics. It could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back without refueling.
Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine provided better high-altitude performance than the R-2800. In dogfights, it could outturn both the P-47 and German fighters. Why would experienced combat pilots choose to keep an inferior fighter? The answer revealed what veterans had learned through hard combat experience. Performance numbers don't tell the whole story. The P-47 had one quality that no performance chart could measure: survivability. Pilots who had flown both types knew that the Mustang, while faster and more agile, was fragile. Its liquid-cooled engine could be disabled by a single hit. Its lighter construction meant less protection for the pilot. The R-2800 radial engine in the P-47 could absorb tremendous battle damage and keep running. Multiple pilots had returned to base with cylinders shot away, oil lines severed, and massive holes in the engine, yet the double Wasp kept turning. The P-47's heavy structure and extensive armor meant pilots survived hits that would kill them in a Mustang. When choosing between performance and survival, veterans chose survival. The 56th decision proved prescient. As the war moved into its final year, ground attack missions became increasingly important. The Allied armies advancing through France and into Germany needed close air support. P-47s, with their robust construction and heavy firepower, excelled at ground attack. The Thunderbolt could dive through intense anti-aircraft fire, deliver bombs and rockets, strafe ground targets, and absorb hits that would bring down lighter aircraft. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, P-47 pilots had mastered both air superiority and ground attack roles. Thunderbolts of the 9th Air Force, dedicated to tactical air support, devastated German armor, troops, transport, and airfields during the Normandy invasion and subsequent breakout. They flew multiple missions daily, shuttling between forward airstrips and targets just miles ahead of advancing infantry. The P-47's weapons load impressed everyone. It could carry 2,500 pounds of bombs, equivalent to half the bomb load of a B-17 Flying Fortress heavy bomber. It could carry 10 5-inch rockets, devastating against tanks and fortifications. And it still had 8 50-caliber machine guns with 3,400 rounds of ammunition. This combination of bombs, rockets, and guns made the P-47 the most effective ground attack fighter of World War II. German soldiers learned to fear the sound of the R-2800. When thunderbolts appeared overhead, enemy columns scattered. The concentrated firepower of 8 machine guns could destroy vehicles, kill troops in the open, and suppress anti-aircraft positions. Bombs and rockets destroyed bridges, ammunition dumps, fuel depots, and countless other targets. German commanders reported that air attacks severely hampered their ability to move forces and supplies. The Wolfpack continued hunting through 1944 and into 1945. Colonel David C. Schilling took command when Zemtic transferred to the 479th Fighter Group in August 1944. The 56th maintained its aggressive spirit and high victory count. By war's end, Zemke's Wolfpack would be the top-scoring U.S. fighter group of the 8th Air Force with 665.5 recognized aerial kills, plus an additional 311 ground kills. The numbers tell the story of the P-47's combat effectiveness, though statistics alone cannot capture the full impact. Between 1943 and 1945, P-47 Thunderbolts flew 746,000 sorties of all types. This massive operational tempo exceeded any other American fighter. The P-47 was everywhere: Europe, Pacific, China, Burma, India, North Africa, Italy. Aerial combat statistics were impressive. P-47 pilots destroyed approximately 7,000 enemy aircraft during World War II. Of these, over 3,500 were aerial victories, enemy planes shot down in air-to-air combat. The remainder were destroyed on the ground during strafing attacks. The air-to-air kill-to-loss ratio was 4.6 to 1, meaning for every P-47 lost in air combat, American pilots shot down 4.6 enemy aircraft. 3,499 P-47s were lost to all causes in combat. This sounds like a high number until compared against total production. 15,683 P-47s were built, more than any other American fighter type. Loss rate per sortie averaged 0.7%,
extraordinarily low for a fighter that flew into heavy combat throughout the war. The P-47's robust construction kept loss rates far below lighter, more vulnerable fighters. Ground attack statistics were even more impressive. P-47s destroyed approximately 9,000 locomotives, 86,000 railroad cars, 68,000 trucks, and 6,000 armored vehicles. They demolished bridges, ammunition dumps, fuel depots, and countless other targets. German commanders reported that air attacks severely hampered their ability to move forces and supplies. Luftwaffe ace Hans Bahr, who scored 220 aerial victories during the war, offered the ultimate enemy compliment. He said the P-47 could absorb an astounding amount of lead and had to be handled very carefully. Coming from one of Germany's top fighter pilots, this assessment validated everything American pilots had learned about their tough fighter. The 56th Fighter Group's record exemplified P-47 effectiveness. Over roughly 2 years of combat operations, 56 pilots totaled 665.5 aerial victories, about 100 more than the second highest scoring fighter group in the 8th Air Force. The 56th produced 39 aces, including the European theater's 2 leading American aces, Francis Gaprasky with 28 victories and Robert S. Johnson with 27 victories. Hub Zemke himself was credited with 17.75 confirmed victories in 154 combat missions. His leadership created the most effective fighter unit in the 8th Air Force. When Zemke transferred to the 479th Fighter Group in August 1944, he attempted to apply his lessons learned to a struggling unit equipped with P-38 Lightnings converting to P-51 Mustangs. He scored 3 more victories before being shot down over Germany on October 30, 1944, and spending the remainder of the war as a prisoner. Medal of Honor recognition came to P-47 pilots in both theaters. Colonel Neil E. Kirby of the 348th Fighter Group in the Pacific received the Medal of Honor for action over Wewak, New Guinea on October 11, 1943. Leading a flight of 4 P-47s, Kirby encountered 40 Japanese planes and shot down 6 in the ensuing combat. First Lieutenant Raymond L. Knight of the 350th Fighter Group was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for actions over northern Italy on April 24 and 25, 1945, repeatedly leading attacks on enemy airfields despite intense anti-aircraft fire. Production numbers reflected confidence in the design. Republic Aviation built 15,683 Thunderbolts between 1941 and November 1945. Curtiss Wheel built additional units under license. This made the P-47 the most produced American fighter of World War II, surpassing even the famous P-51 Mustang. The ugly fighter that nobody wanted in 1943 became the fighter that won the war.
As 1945 began, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Allied air superiority was complete. Yet the 56th Fighter Group continued operations, now equipped with the ultimate Thunderbolt variant, the P-47M. This specialized model featured a more powerful R-2857 engine producing 2,300 horsepower, allowing speeds exceeding 460 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. The P-47M was designed specifically to catch German jet aircraft. The revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262 and rocket-powered Me-163 were the Luftwaffe's last technological advantages, capable of speeds far exceeding conventional piston-engine fighters. The P-47M, while still slower than jets, could match them during certain flight regimes, particularly during takeoff and landing when jets were most vulnerable. Engine troubles initially plagued the P-47M. Improper sealing during Atlantic transport allowed humid ocean air to corrode pistons. After multiple accidents and forced landings, the 56th Fighter Group was grounded in February 1945 while replacement engines were procured. Pilots reluctantly began training on P-51 Mustangs, fearing they would lose their beloved Thunderbolts. But by March 25th, the engine problems were resolved and the Wolfpack returned to operations in P-47Ms. Despite the paucity of targets, the P-47M distinguished itself exactly as designed. On March 14, 1945, 3 P-47s from the 62nd Fighter Squadron swooped down on 2 low-flying Erido 234B jet bombers targeting the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen.
The P-47Ms matched the jet's speed and shot down both. On March 25th, Major George Bostwick and wingman Edwin Crosswaite destroyed two Me-262s as they attempted to land at Parcham Airfield. The 56 final aerial victories came on April 10, 1945, when Lieutenants Walter Sharbow and Bill Wilkerson shot down two more Me-262s over Muritz Lake. 3 days later, after failing to encounter enemy fighters, the Wolfpack conducted one final devastating strike. Swooping down on Arabeck Airfield, their 8,500 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition destroyed 95 parked German aircraft. New experimental T-48 incendiary rounds, designed specifically to ignite kerosene jet fuel, proved especially effective. After the German surrender on May 8, 1945, the final tally was calculated. Zemke's Wolfpack ended the war as the top-scoring United States fighter group of the 8th Air Force with 665.5 recognized aerial kills plus 311 ground kills, 1,000 aircraft destroyed. They achieved this flying exclusively the P-47 Thunderbolt, the only 8th Air Force group that refused to trade their Jugs for Mustangs. The P-47M models claimed only 15 aerial victories, serving after the Luftwaffe was largely defeated. But 12 P-47Ms were lost in accidents and 2 were shot down by ground fire. Not one fell in air-to-air combat. The ultimate evolution of the ugly fighter remained undefeated in the sky until war's end. While European operations dominated American attention, P-47s also served extensively in the Pacific theater, though their story is less well known. The 348th Fighter Group, flying from Port Moresby, New Guinea, introduced Thunderbolts against Japanese forces in 1943. Operating in the jungle, heat, and humidity of the Southwest Pacific presented different challenges than European combat. Range limitations initially hampered Pacific operations. The vast distances between islands required longer range fighters than early P-47 variants could provide. Republic addressed this by developing the P-47N, featuring a completely redesigned wing with increased fuel capacity. Introduced in April 1945, the P-47N could escort B-29 superfortresses on missions against the Japanese home islands. Japanese pilots respected the Thunderbolt's firepower and toughness. In turning dogfights, the lighter, more maneuverable Japanese fighters had advantages, but P-47s using boom and zoom tactics similar to those developed by Zemke proved effective. Diving attacks from altitude, heavy firepower, and immediate recovery to altitude minimized the P-47's weaknesses while exploiting its strengths. Ground attack proved equally important in the Pacific. P-47s devastated Japanese airfields, destroyed shipping in harbors, and supported amphibious landings. The robust construction that saved lives in Europe proved equally valuable against Japanese anti-aircraft fire. Stories circulated of P-47s returning with entire sections of wing or tail shot away, damage that would doom other aircraft. Colonel Neil Kirby's October 11, 1943 action over Wewak, New Guinea exemplified Pacific P-47 operations. Leading 4 Thunderbolts against 40 Japanese aircraft, Kirby's aggressive tactics and accurate shooting destroyed 6 enemy planes. Though he was later shot down and killed on March 5, 1944, his Medal of Honor recognized the P-47's effectiveness in the demanding Pacific environment. The P-47N arrived in theater as the war entered its final months. These long-range variants participated in the final bombing campaign against Japan, escorting B-29 superfortresses and conducting fighter sweeps over Japanese airfields. When Japan surrendered on September 2, 1945, P-47s remained in frontline service across the Pacific, ready to support the planned invasion that never came. Production of P-47 Thunderbolts ended in November 1945 as the war concluded. Republic Aviation had built 15,683 examples of the chunky fighter. They remained in service with the United States Air Force, formed from the Army Air Forces in 1947 through the late 1940s. Many were transferred to Air National Guard units, where they served into the mid-1950s. The P-47 saw combat once more during the early months of the Korean War. Some F-47 models, as they were redesignated in 1948, flew ground attack missions from Japanese bases before jet fighters completely replaced piston-engine aircraft. The Old Warrior acquitted itself well in this final combat appearance.
its robust construction and heavy firepower still relevant in modern warfare. Alexander Kartvelny's career continued beyond the Thunderbolt. He designed the F-84 Thunderjet, one of America's first operational jet fighters, and later the F-105 Thunder Chief, a supersonic fighter-bomber that saw extensive service during the Vietnam War. Both aircraft carried design philosophies from the P-47, robust construction, heavy weapons load, and emphasis on survivability above all else. Kartvely remained with Republic Aviation until retirement. The P-47's spiritual successor arrived in 1976 when Fairchild Republic introduced the A-10 Thunderbolt II. This dedicated ground attack aircraft was nicknamed the Warthog for its unconventional appearance, echoing the original Thunderbolt's reputation as an ugly but effective warrior. The A-10 carries a massive 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the modern equivalent of the P-47's 850 caliber machine guns, and shares the same philosophy: heavy firepower, robust construction, and survivability above all else. Today, surviving P-47s are prized warbirds, painstakingly restored and flown at air shows. The distinctive sound of the R-2800 engine brings aviation enthusiasts to tears. Pristine examples command millions of dollars, their value reflecting both historical importance and rarity. Museums worldwide display Thunderbolts, telling new generations about the ugly fighter that won the war. In 2015, Indiana designated the P-47 as its official state aircraft, honoring Republic Aviation's Evangelist factory that produced thousands of Thunderbolts. The Indiana Thunderbolts minor league hockey team takes its name from the famous fighter, maintaining the legacy in popular culture. Indiana's pride in its contribution to World War II victory centers on the airplane that local workers built. The lessons of the P-47 story remain relevant. Appearance doesn't determine capability. Initial impressions can be wrong. Persistence through early failures leads to eventual success. Robust engineering that emphasizes reliability and survivability over raw performance creates systems that work in real-world conditions. And sometimes the best weapon is the one that brings its operators home alive, not the one that looks best on paper. Hub Zemke's legacy extended far beyond his wartime achievements. After liberation from German prisoner of war camps, he continued serving in the United States Air Force, retiring as a colonel. He wrote extensively about his experiences, sharing tactical lessons with new generations of fighter pilots.